An elite socialite, used to look down on others, publicly humiliates a quiet elderly woman in a luxury boutique. But what she doesn't know, that same woman is one phone call away from flipping her entire world upside down. Within minutes, black SUVs arrive, and the truth behind years of hidden corruption, fraud, and scandal comes crashing down. The tables turn so fast, you'll want to stick around until the end to see how it all unravels. Before we dive in, comment below where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe because this story is going to shock you, and you won't believe how it ends. Ready? Let's get into it. The golden afternoon light streamed through the massive glass windows of Lancaster & Company, one of the most exclusive boutiques in the city. Every surface gleamed, polished marble floors, chandeliers dripping with crystals, and meticulously arranged racks displaying designer clothing that cost more than an average person's monthly salary. Margaret Lou stepped inside, the soft chime of the door announcing her entrance. At 75, she carried herself with the quiet poise of a woman who had commanded classrooms for decades, molding young minds and shaping futures. Her salt and pepper hair was neatly styled, and her simple but elegant navy dress, though not designer, was immaculately pressed. A string of pearls, a retirement gift from her former students, rested delicately around her neck. She moved unhurriedly, trailing her fingers along the silk fabrics, admiring their craftsmanship. But she could already feel the eyes on her. Across the room, reclining on a velvet settee as if it were a throne, Evelyn Whitmore sipped from a glass of champagne. At 80, Evelyn had built an empire of influence, not through kindness or intellect, but through ruthless social maneuvering. She had spent a lifetime ensuring she remained at the top of the city's elite circles, making and breaking reputations with a mere whisper at charity galas. And right now, she had found her next target. "Oh, how charming!" Evelyn's voice carried across the boutique, just loud enough for everyone to hear. A little nostalgia in the modern world. You don't see that kind of dress anymore. Or pearls. How quaint. The laughter came in waves, first from the two women flanking Evelyn, then from a few of the younger shoppers. It was the kind of laughter meant to sting, designed to let someone know they were out of place. Margaret barely blinked. She had faced unruly students, arrogant school board members, and even corrupt education officials in her time. A petty woman with too much money and too little substance? Hardly worth her concern. She continued browsing, refusing to acknowledge the growing amusement at her expense. But Evelyn was far from done. She leaned forward, swirling the champagne in her crystal flute, a smirk curling at the corner of her lips. "Tell me, dear, are you lost? Or perhaps shopping for a granddaughter? I do hope she has better taste." More laughter. This time, the store employees stiffened. The boutique manager, a woman in her mid-30s with a too-practiced smile, stepped forward. "Ma'am," she said, her voice honeyed but firm, "perhaps I can suggest something more suitable for your style? We have a lovely selection in our discounted section." Margaret finally turned, her sharp eyes locking onto the manager's with the precision of a seasoned educator about to correct a misbehaving student. "Are you implying I don't belong here?" The manager hesitated, only for a second, but it was enough. Evelyn seized the moment, pressing a manicured hand to her chest in mock concern. "Oh, don't be upset, dear. This boutique caters to a particular clientele. Surely you understand." Margaret smiled then, a slow, knowing smile. She clasped her hands in front of her, taking her time as she looked around, at the lavish displays, at the employees who now looked uncertain, at Evelyn's entourage, who were grinning like jackals circling prey. And then finally she looked back at Evelyn. "You know, Evelyn, the last time someone underestimated me, they regretted it for a very, very long time." Evelyn blinked, momentarily thrown by the unexpected response. Margaret reached into her purse, pulling out her phone. She tapped a single contact, and with a single word, everything changed. "It's time." The boutique fell into a heavy silence. Outside, the distant purr of approaching black SUVs cut through the laughter. Margaret slipped her phone back into her purse, her expression unbothered, her posture unwavering. Evelyn let out a slow chuckle, raising her champagne glass with smug amusement, as if celebrating a battle already won. "Oh, my dear, you do amuse me," she said, her voice thick with condescension. "Do you think a phone call will change anything? You can't buy respect, you know." Margaret studied her, the hint of a smile playing on her lips. Respect isn't bought, Evelyn. It's earned. But then again, you wouldn't know the difference. For a brief second, something flickered across Evelyn's face, a crack in her confidence, but it disappeared just as quickly. The soft hum of powerful engines outside barely registered at first, but the sudden stiffness in the boutique manager's posture did not go unnoticed. The reflection in the pristine glass storefront revealed several black SUVs pulling up, their tinted windows concealing whoever was inside. Evelyn's entourage exchanged nervous glances, a shift in the atmosphere creeping into the room, subtle yet undeniable. The boutique staff, who had moments ago been eager to dismiss Margaret, now seemed frozen in place. Then the door swung open. A sharply dressed man in his 40s strode in, his presence commanding attention without effort. He wasn't just well-dressed, he carried the air of someone accustomed to authority, the kind of man whose words could open doors or shut them forever. Behind him, a second figure followed, a woman in an elegant but severe suit, her every movement calculated, her expression unreadable. The boutique manager visibly paled, as if suddenly realizing that whatever was happening was far beyond her pay grade. Evelyn's fingers tightened around her glass. The man stopped before Margaret, offering her a respectful nod. "Ms. Liu," he greeted, his tone even but firm. "Everything is prepared as you requested." Margaret returned the nod before turning back to Evelyn, whose once amused smile had turned brittle. "You spoke about power," Margaret mused, her voice as calm as ever. "And you were right. The world does run on power. But your mistake, Evelyn, was assuming I had none." Evelyn opened her mouth to respond, perhaps to scoff, perhaps to demand an explanation, but before she could, the man beside Margaret turned his gaze toward the boutique manager. "Lancaster and Company operates under strict ethical guidelines," he stated smoothly, his words polite yet cutting. "Would you care to explain why a long-standing patron and philanthropist like Ms. Liu was treated with such blatant disrespect?" The manager swallowed hard, her gaze darting between Margaret and the man standing beside her. I wasn't aware." "I believe it's too late for that," the woman beside him cut in, her voice cool and measured. "There will be a full review of this establishment. Effective immediately." The boutique manager looked ready to collapse. Evelyn, however, refused to back down so easily. "Oh, please," she scoffed, her bravado returning. "Do you expect me to be impressed by some well-dressed errand boys? Margaret, whatever game you think you're playing." "You should stop talking now, Mrs. Whitmore." The man's voice remained polite, but there was something in his tone that made Evelyn falter. For the first time, real hesitation crossed her face. Margaret took a slow step forward, watching Evelyn carefully. "You believe wealth is power," she said, her voice soft yet sharp. "You believe cruelty makes you untouchable. But tell me, Evelyn, do you know what true power looks like?" A moment passed. Then, with practiced ease, the woman beside Margaret reached into her leather briefcase, withdrawing a thick folder and setting it down on the boutique's pristine glass counter. It bore Evelyn Whitmore's name. Evelyn's breath caught. The shift in her expression was almost imperceptible, but Margaret saw it. The slight widening of the eyes, the tightening of her grip on the champagne glass, the way her carefully practiced poise seemed just a little less steady. Margaret tilted her head slightly, watching as Evelyn hesitated before reaching for the file. The boutique remained silent, the entire room suspended in a state of quiet anticipation. "Open it," Margaret said. Evelyn hesitated for only a moment longer before flipping the folder open. As her eyes scanned the contents, her face drained of color. Whatever she was reading, it was enough to make the glass slip from her fingers, shattering as it hit the floor. The boutique manager flinched at the sound, but no one else moved. Margaret exhaled softly, watching as Evelyn's shoulders sagged ever so slightly. When she finally looked up, her usual arrogance was gone, replaced by something else, something that, if Margaret didn't know better, almost looked like fear. "Who?" Evelyn swallowed hard. "Who gave you this?" Margaret simply smiled. "I told you, Evelyn," she said gently. "Respect isn't bought. It's earned. And unlike you, I know exactly how to earn it." She turned, walking past Evelyn without another glance, the man and woman following closely behind. As she reached the door, she paused just long enough to murmur one final remark over her shoulder. "Enjoy the rest of your day." Then she stepped outside, leaving Evelyn standing amidst the shards of her shattered champagne glass, gripping the file with trembling hands. The boutique fell into an unnerving silence. The air grew thick, and even the soft background music playing in the store seemed to cease as Charlotte Liu, Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court and Margaret's daughter, walked through the doors with an air of unshakable authority. The two black SUVs that had just arrived outside had barely rolled to a stop before Charlotte and her aides stepped out. Their arrival was immediate, and their presence could not have been more deliberate. Margaret stood her ground as her daughter walked straight toward her, a serene smile on Margaret's face as she embraced her. Evelyn Whitmore, once a powerful socialite, stood rooted to the spot, her face blanching as Charlotte made her way toward Margaret. The socialite and store manager, still confused and lost in the unfolding scene, exchanged uncertain glances. Charlotte's words shattered the tension. "Mother, are these the same people who have been laundering money through fake high-end sales?" Evelyn's face twisted in horror as she registered what Charlotte had just said. The store's manager visibly swayed, realizing the walls were closing in. Panic rippled through the boutique as Charlotte's words echoed in the suddenly oppressive silence. The luxury store that Evelyn had controlled for years with her unchallenged power was now the epicenter of a federal investigation. Charlotte didn't need to explain any further. She simply gestured to her aides, who immediately began securing the premises and preparing for the audit. "I'm sure there's a misunderstanding," the boutique manager stammered, but Charlotte's sharp glare silenced her before she could finish. "You'll have the opportunity to explain when my office subpoenas your records." Margaret, standing quietly beside her daughter, looked over at Evelyn, who was attempting to maintain some semblance of composure but was visibly shaking. Margaret turned her attention back to Evelyn, the former socialite who had always used her wealth and status as a shield to protect her from scrutiny. "Yes, Evelyn," Margaret said, her voice as smooth and calm as ever. "These are indeed the people." Evelyn's fingers gripped the folder tightly in her hands, the contents suddenly making too much sense. She had hidden behind her wealth for far too long, using her connections and influence to play by her own rules. But today, everything was falling apart. Charlotte gave a quiet nod, her face betraying nothing, but the efficiency of her movements spoke volumes. "Secure the financial records," she instructed her aides. "We need everything, transaction history, wire transfers, invoices, everything tied to this place." Charlotte turned back to Margaret, whose gaze had not faltered. "Shall we press charges, or should we let the IRS handle it?" Margaret smiled gently. "Let them fight over it. It seems only fair that they do." The tension in the boutique mounted as Charlotte, with her commanding presence, issued further instructions. "We'll need a complete audit of all transactions for the last 5 years. Any employee or associate connected to this enterprise should be prepared for questioning." The boutique staff, once so comfortable in their luxurious environment, now found themselves scrambling, caught off guard by the intensity of the federal action unfolding before them. Meanwhile, Evelyn, realizing her empire was crumbling, turned to the manager, who was already pale and speechless. "This isn't possible," Evelyn muttered under her breath, struggling to maintain her composure. But the damage had been done. Charlotte had laid the truth bare. Margaret turned to Evelyn, her voice carrying a quiet finality. "You thought your wealth protected you. But now," she said, looking around the boutique, "it's nothing but a paper wall crumbling to the ground." Evelyn stared, stunned, as Charlotte took a few steps back, her aides already moving to seize the necessary documents. She couldn't comprehend how it had all slipped away so quickly, how a woman she had spent years belittling had turned the tables on her so effortlessly. Margaret, ever the picture of grace, adjusted the pearl necklace around her neck. The same one Evelyn had mocked earlier, now a symbol of something far greater than the luxury Evelyn had so long flaunted. Margaret's soft words broke the silence. "I think, Evelyn, we were discussing power earlier. How does it feel to lose it?" The words seemed to pierce the air like a silent dagger. Evelyn's eyes were wide, her lips parting as if trying to form words, but nothing came out. Her grip on the folder was tight, her knuckles white, but the confidence she had once exuded was completely gone. Her eyes were now filled with the undeniable flicker of fear. Charlotte, noticing her mother's calm demeanor, let out a small breath, her expression softening only slightly. "Mom," she said gently, "they underestimated us." Margaret nodded. "And they made the fatal mistake of thinking that their power was invincible." The irony was impossible to ignore. Evelyn, who had spent decades using her wealth to silence voices, was now the one silenced, outmatched by a woman she had once dismissed as inconsequential. Margaret's steady presence, combined with Charlotte's calculated actions, had brought down an empire built on corruption and privilege. The truth had spoken louder than any wealth could ever hope to. As the federal agents moved through the boutique, securing documents and gathering evidence, Evelyn stood frozen, her face pale, trapped by her own hubris. The once untouchable socialite was now just another name in the growing list of those who would be held accountable. And Margaret Liu, with quiet dignity and unshakable resolve, had proven once again that power rooted in truth could bring even the most entrenched systems to their knees. As the federal agents moved swiftly through the boutique, Margaret's mind raced through the details of the operation she had quietly pieced together over the past few months. She had known that Evelyn's supposed charitable foundations were far from benevolent. Behind the glitzy facade of charity events and high society galas, Evelyn had been running a network of fraudulent schemes designed to evade taxes and funnel money into her offshore accounts. But Margaret had always been patient, watching, documenting every suspicious detail. Now, with Charlotte's authority behind her, it was all coming to light. Evelyn, once a woman who had wielded her wealth like a weapon, tried to hold onto some shred of dignity. She let out a nervous laugh, as though it were just another misunderstanding, but the sweat now beading on her forehead betrayed her. The confident posture she had so effortlessly maintained for decades was crumbling. Charlotte, having already prepared the groundwork for a federal investigation, watched as Evelyn's empire of lies and corruption unraveled in real time. As agents began seizing security footage from the boutique's surveillance system, it became clear that the scale of Evelyn's operation went far beyond just the store. The boutique itself, with its luxurious offerings and private clientele, had been a major part of a money-laundering scheme that spanned years. With each piece of evidence secured, the walls closed in tighter around Evelyn. The once untouchable socialite was now being escorted out by 2 federal officers, her hands cuffed behind her back. Her once pristine appearance was disheveled, her composure shattered. The chaos of the moment was only intensified when one of the customers, a young woman who had been quietly observing from a distance, pulled out her phone and began live-streaming the event. Evelyn, once the darling of society's elite, was now the center of a scandal that would spread across the internet like wildfire. Within hours, Evelyn Whitmore's name was trending for all the wrong reasons. Social media platforms exploded with commentary, condemning her for the fraud, manipulation, and corruption she had been involved in for years. Even as Evelyn tried to maintain some sense of control, the damage was done. The live stream was being shared by thousands, and news outlets were picking up the story. Evelyn's face was plastered on every screen, her reputation in tatters. The grand illusion she had spent decades carefully building was now a shattered memory, replaced by the harsh reality of her criminal activities being exposed to the public. Margaret watched quietly, her resolve unbroken, as the final pieces of Evelyn's empire fell apart. It was a bittersweet moment for Margaret. Though she had long known of Evelyn's deceit, seeing it all unfold, exposed for the world to see, was a victory not just for her, but for truth and justice. This was no longer about one woman's fall from grace. It was about the unraveling of a corrupt system that had allowed Evelyn to thrive at the expense of countless others. And now, thanks to Margaret and Charlotte, that system was crumbling. As Evelyn was escorted into the back of a federal vehicle, her eyes wide with disbelief and fear, Margaret stood tall, the weight of years of quiet perseverance heavy upon her. She had seen the fragility of power long before this day, understood how fragile the false narratives of superiority truly were. Margaret had never craved wealth or status like Evelyn. Instead, she had spent her life fostering growth in others, empowering the next generation with knowledge and integrity. Margaret's words, delivered with the calm confidence of someone who had lived through her share of battles, landed with a quiet authority. As Evelyn was momentarily left alone, still reeling from the reality of her downfall, Margaret approached her, leaned in, and whispered, "Power isn't about looking down on others. It's about lifting them up or watching everything you built collapse under its own weight." Evelyn's face flushed as the true weight of Margaret's statement hit her. In that moment, she knew her empire was finished. The lies, the deceit, the years of manipulating those around her, It had all led to this point, the crushing realization that her wealth and arrogance had been her undoing. She had chosen to trample others to maintain her position, to create a false hierarchy of power, and in doing so, had built an empire on shifting sand. In the weeks that followed, the consequences of Evelyn's actions were felt across the city. The boutique was shut down, its high-end merchandise seized as evidence, and its financial records scrutinized for evidence of the money-laundering operation. Evelyn, once an untouchable figure, was now facing charges of fraud, conspiracy, and countless other crimes. The luxury of her life was replaced with the grim reality of her future: court hearings, jail time, and the complete disintegration of the persona she had crafted so carefully for decades. But for Margaret, the victory was not in the punishment that Evelyn would face. It was in the message that she had sent, a lesson that would resonate for years to come. Margaret had quietly endured the mockery of others for her humility, her modesty, and her refusal to be intimidated. Now she had become a symbol of quiet strength, proving to everyone who had ever doubted her that true power came not from wealth or social standing, but from wisdom, integrity, and the courage to stand up for what was right. Her story spread, inspiring others who had been overlooked, dismissed, or underestimated to find their own power, not through dominance or wealth, but through standing firm in their values, lifting others up, and remaining unshaken in the face of adversity. Margaret had not only exposed Evelyn's corruption, but she had shown the world that the true measure of success was the ability to help others succeed, not to crush them beneath one's own ego. As Margaret looked out at the bustling city, the shadows of a new dawn beginning to fall, she smiled to herself. The lesson had been learned, not just by Evelyn, but by the world around her. And in this quiet moment, Margaret knew that she had not only won this battle, but had left a legacy far more valuable than any boutique, any wealth, or any fleeting moment of power. It was the legacy of wisdom, of lifting others up, and of knowing when to let the weight of arrogance collapse under its own weight. As the dust settled and the media frenzy around Evelyn's downfall quieted, Margaret's story continued to resonate. The moral of the story became a rallying cry for those who had once been overlooked or dismissed. It was a lesson that transcended wealth, age, and social standing. Never underestimate someone based on appearances. The very people you look down on, who might seem insignificant or out of place, could very well be the ones holding your fate in their hands. Margaret's quiet wisdom and unshakable dignity had been her greatest strength, and it was that strength that had turned the tables on Evelyn. The once mighty socialite, who had lived her life believing that power came from wealth and status, was now facing the consequences of her actions. Meanwhile, Margaret, who had lived humbly and with purpose, had proven that true power lay in integrity and the courage to do what was right, no matter the cost. For many, Margaret became a symbol of resilience, someone who had never sought the spotlight, but whose actions had brought about a monumental shift. Her story served as a reminder that power is not always visible at first glance. The quiet ones, the ones who do not boast, are often the ones who possess the greatest strength. It is in their unassuming nature and their commitment to doing what is right that true power resides. In the end, the story of Margaret and Evelyn was more than just about the fall of a corrupt socialite. It was a story about the power of humility, the importance of standing up for others, and the truth that appearances can be deceiving. Margaret had taught a valuable lesson to all who had underestimated her, and in doing so, had changed the course of her own life and the lives of others forever.